Hey everyone, this is Joe with Car Care Team. Today we're going to replace the shocks on a 2002 Lexus LS 430, and we're going to talk about ride control. Ride control is your car's suspension. It consists of a shock, a spring, and some suspension arms. Your car rides on springs, which keep it suspended in the air. The springs bounce at a specific rate at different speeds. The job of the shock is to dampen the force of the spring, which will slow the rate of the spring and keep it from bouncing. The shock will also absorb impacts from uneven roads to allow a smoother ride. When the shocks fail, they allow the wheel to hop up and down when you're driving, especially at high rates of speed. This allows an uneven wear to the tires, which is called cupping, which is this wavy pattern across the tread, which creates a humming noise. If you pay attention, you might notice how your car reacts to a speed bump. If the car continues to bounce, that means the shocks are not doing their job. They're not dampening the force of the spring. When shocks wear, you may also notice an increase in your stopping distance. When brakes are applied, all the weight of the vehicle is shifted forward, which will allow the front of the vehicle to dive down. Sometimes when shocks are failing, the car may still ride smoothly because they fail slowly over time and the ride becomes mushy and not noticeably harsh, unless the shocks fail completely, which gives you a really bad ride. Let's go ahead and replace these shocks. Let's get these wheels off. When lifting the vehicle, I like to use a jack as an added measure. The shock has two mounting points. One is at the bottom at the lower control arm here, and the second is at the top. Three to be exact. So I'm going to stabilize the control arm from the bottom with a jack in order to allow me to release the link pin that's on the stabilizer bar. This bar helps the suspension to not twist when you're in the corners, as the frame can twist because it is just a big piece of metal. So I'm going to take off the link pin in order to get access to the lower fastener of the shock mount. I've already broke it loose with a 17mm ratchet, and I've jacked it up a little bit with the jack in order to allow that bolt to come out freely. I'm going to undo the lower fastener for the shock, and we have a 17mm on one side, 19mm on the other side. So I'm just going to use that to hold it in place and see if we can break this one loose. We put a little bit of WD-40 on that nut, and now we're going to break it free, holding the opposite side. Thought it moved a little bit. Make sure the opposite side is not spinning. There we go, we got it. Okay, now that we got that one off, let's go ahead and release it from the top mounts. Up here we have three 14mm nuts, which we'll use our 14mm deep socket to remove. Always be careful to not hit these power steering reservoirs or any of these plastic mounts, as they get brittle with age and are more prone to breaking. So you just want to be careful with those. Since I've got my control arm supported at the bottom, it's okay to undo these bolts. I'm going to take off the ABS sensor wire because we are going to drop down the knuckle from the upper control arm. In order to remove the ball joint, go ahead and thread the nut back on in order to not damage the threads. Now we'll go ahead and remove the nut. Now that we have our upper and lower control arm disconnected, we can drop the suspension with our jack a little lower. We've disconnected the line so there's no tension on them. And now we can lift up our shock over the control arm and slip it out. So this is a McPherson strut setup, okay? You've got your spring inside your strut, which does the same thing as the shock. And this one's not leaking, but it has been going through a lot of use, and I've noticed that it has excessive travel at certain times. So we're gonna go ahead and replace this one. You can get a complete strut assembly from some auto parts stores. They call it a quick strut. It would be an aftermarket spring, aftermarket shock, and you can just take this out and throw one of those into your car and move on. What I like to do is just replace the shock only and reuse the spring, as normally the original springs I do believe to be higher quality, will last longer. And so I'm going to go ahead and reuse this spring. We're going to use spring compressor set, which is available for rent at certain auto parts stores, and we're going to use that. The other way is to actually use a spring compressor, like a wall mounted one, at a shop, which we don't have here. So I'm going to show you how to do it the easy way, the do-it-yourself way, at home with tools that you can rent. So this is a McPherson strut spring compressor tool that we're going to attempt to use here, and it has these safety pins which will allow you to clamp on and safely. The danger here, a lot of people don't like this tool, myself included, but this is the only at-home option, which I'd like to explore a little bit, and in case anyone is interested in using it, this is my experience with it. So I'll position the first side by spinning the nut to align with the springs. Generally, I think the issue comes when you try and use the further out ones. I think it's best to go a little bit closer inward, and so that there's nothing in the way later when you're trying to actually insert your new strut. So I am going to use the inner ones. Well, I have to clamp quite far. Not sure if this will allow me the right amount of clamping force, but we'll try, and if not, we'll reposition it. And then these locks go in place. This will go. So you do want them to be 180 degrees apart from each other. So if my first one's gonna be here, then that one's gotta be there. And then this one will clamp all the way down here. Okay. So you can purchase these, I'm sure, at any parts store. They are available for rent, as I don't like using them. I don't want to buy a set, but they're like 50 bucks if you want to keep them. If you return them, they just give your money back. All right, now we're just going to evenly tighten down one side at a time, because we don't want to kink it in either direction. If one side gets weaker than the other, it just falls. So you just want to go little by little, until there's no tension from the upper and lower mounting points of the spring. Make sure you guys are wearing protective eyewear when you're doing this sort of thing, which is really important. Be careful having your hands really close to this kind of thing, because you know something could let go, so just be cognizant of that so you can move out of the way really quickly. There's a lot of tension on the spring. And I do believe we have a long ways to go. Just make sure you go evenly. And keep watching all the mounting points. Make sure that nothing is slipping away or coming apart. I do see this one is kinking a little bit in this direction. I mean, it will tend to do that because the springs are angled. But if you see it move too much, just proceed with caution. I just keep rechecking it every time I turn it because we're getting under really high tension now. The spring is now loose, so you can see as it's not putting any tension onto the bottom. This is why I want to see a little bit of play, maybe a little bit. I think this is the time to get a little bit down if we, just in case. So just a little more. I'll go a few clicks on this one. Okay, we've got decent play here. I think it's time to undo the upper strut mount bolt located at the top of the strut. We're going to use our impact gun to remove the upper shock mount. We should be able to slide the strut out of the spring. And that essentially is your shock absorber. Our little sleeve has been deteriorating, but you know what? We're gonna leave it in there because it's gonna do something. Something's better than nothing. Be very careful with this little setup you have here. This is under loaded pressure. You do not want to touch this thing. But you do want to inspect this shock mount because sometimes it makes noises. When you take the new one out of the box, go ahead and compare it. Make sure that everything matches up as far as the threads, the locations of the different mounting points, and the angles. And these look correct. So we're going to go ahead and install the new one into our spring. Just like we took the original one out, we're going to go from the bottom and insert the new shock into our strut mount. It has a D shaft, which will only allow it to go in one way. And so once it's in and located and secured onto the spring, go ahead and reinstall the shock with your mount, the upper mount washer, and the nut. Secure this to the proper torque spec. Which can be found in the repair manual. We're going to tighten this up when it's actually fully installed. This is enough for us to now release the spring compressor. Remember to do this evenly. As you do release tension from one side, it can pivot and pop out. Really happy with how these actually work, even though it's come loose. You're still holding it in place, which is a good reassuring feeling that the added safety measures have been used. Now that we got our strut all back together, let's go ahead and install it back into the car. Remember how we took it out. That way you don't wrestle as much with it. Line up the upper bolts. And then allow it to slip into the lower shock mount. Okay, go ahead and run your lower bolt in to ensure that you have it in the right location and so that it doesn't move. Now that we've got that one started, let's go to the top, make sure everything's lined up, and resecure those bolts. Now that everything's lined up, we can use our jack to lift everything up. All right, let's go ahead and reconnect the upper control arm. You can lift everything up so keep it at a not such an awkward angle. Let's go ahead and mount that bracket back on. Make sure to reinstall a new cotter pin. Or I need to turn just a little bit. Let's go ahead and reconnect this mount here. And not to forget to retighten our lower strut mount. All right, once you've secured the lower strut mount, go ahead and reconnect your link pin to the steering stabilizer bar. You may need to let the jack go just a little bit. Oh, that was too much. And now we can get that right in. Reattach the fastener. And it looks like we're all done. Recheck all your connections, make sure that everything looks normal, make sure that nothing is out of place, all the lines are ran properly, nothing is wrapped around the control arm, is able to move freely, as it does travel when the suspension moves up and down. Let's go ahead and reinstall the wheel. Whenever installing a wheel, I like to thread the bottom nut all the way down, as that will align everything else and keep it from moving. I'm going to replace the other side now. I hope you like this video. Please share with anyone who you think might find it useful, and thanks for watching.